Hey everybody, this is Gabriel Cardona. Welcome to another edition of the Subnet Podcast. Prior today, I was speaking with my amazing co-host, the Don himself, Don Wonton, and we were going back and forth giving, stories about our crypto journey. And I mentioned BITBOX, and he asked me to go into detail a little bit about exactly what BITBOX was and what that chapter in my life was like. And as I began describing it, we started having technical difficulties, and so the call actually ended. But since then, I've been tweaking this machine, and I think that I've got it configured properly. And so now, as another sort of test run, I figured tonight I would talk about my BitBox and Bitcoin Cash journey to kind of give you a sense of what that chapter of my life was like. So first, I have been working now in Silicon Valley for over 10 years. I was very fortunate to land here really in my first job. I was working at Trulia in 2011. I mentioned that in a previous video, 2011, 2012. And so I've just been very fortunate to always sort of be in Silicon Valley and to always be around, rapid innovation and game-changing ideas. And I've really seen a lot of stuff go from being an idea to being a game changer. In college, for example, I was part of the HTML5 working group. So Google actually sponsored me to become a member of the W3C's HTML5 working group, and I was part of the team that helped create HTML5. So I totally remember when HTML5 was just a thought, and XHTML2 was for sure going to be the thing that took over the world. Obviously, it didn't play out that way, and I have a bunch of other cool examples. The beginning of Node.js, the beginning of Ruby on Rails, the beginning of the iPhone, the beginning of Bitcoin. I've seen a lot of ideas start and go super big. And so I've always liked to work in the startup industry. Sometimes I've worked at startups that were growing rapidly, and other times I've just done my own personal thing with friends. And so around the time of 2000, the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017, I was actually working on a personal startup that I called Clone. And so, a little backstory there. I'm a huge advocate of 3D printing. 3D printing is totally transformative. We're just at the very beginning. It's all incredibly crude right now, but it's going to have a huge impact on our lives. You're going to be, I'm a big believer in life extension, and one of the ways you'll be able to extend your life is you'll be able to do things like 3D printing organs. On the whole other end of the spectrum, you'll be able to 3D print buildings. And so, you can imagine in the future when there is like a natural disaster and it totally destroys a city, being able to bring in equipment and just rebuild the city basically overnight by 3D printing it. When we finally do leave the Earth, and I'm confident we will leave the Earth and we'll explore the universe, I think any future where we don't do that seems like a sad ending and a boring ending, in my opinion. Of course, we want to explore the universe. Of course, we want to go and see how far we can travel. When we do travel out into space, when we settle on the moon, when we settle on Mars, for example, it's very likely that we'll take a very minimal amount of actual physical tools, right? Most of the stuff that we in the Mars Society, for example, will be 3D printed. Like everything, when we get there, we're just going to 3D print it. So we'll take spools and spools of raw material, and then when we get to where we need to be, we'll 3D print everything we need on the spot. And there are a couple other places 3D printing is going to be super revolutionary. So there's this really great quote by Richard Feynman, "There's plenty of room at the bottom." And there's this really great thinker named Eric Drexler who has this really great work called Engines of Creation. I totally suggest you go Google this. So Eric Drexler is basically what we consider to be like the grandfather of molecular nanomanufacturing. And so this is a guy who kind of internalized that, there really is a lot of room at the bottom, and these 3D printers are getting so much higher fidelity every year that you can sort of extrapolate and imagine, there's two ways to approach this. You can extrapolate and imagine that eventually the 3D printers will become so high fidelity that you'll be able to operate at a molecular level, and it'll be sort of like a form of alchemy, if you will, because we know for sure that at the moment of the Big Bang there were only a few primitive elements on the elemental table, and that all of the higher level elements were built from those primitives, right? So simplicity beget complexity, which beget greater complexity. And so if you follow that model, if you had like a really super high fidelity nano manufacturing 3D printer, and then you had, like a carbon cartridge and a hydrogen cartridge In theory, you could just start building the higher level elements from those lower primitives. I'm sure I'm oversimplifying this, but again, go check out Engines of Creation by the man himself to get the real in-depth details here. But the point simply being that if you had a super, super high fidelity 3D printer, and if you had sort of like the printer cartridges, for lack of a better word, that had all of the primitive elements from the elemental table, that you could basically build anything, right? So, like in Star Trek, whenever they go to the bridge, or not the bridge, when they go to the bar and they order like a drink and it just shows up right there, that kind of stuff. So you could literally print anything. You could print clean air. You could print a book. You could print a sandwich. You could print a gun. You could print a biological disease, right? You could print anything. You can already 3D print guns. So this is already something that's incredibly transformative. And I used to live in New Orleans. I spent about 4.5 years down in New Orleans, and there's ton of gang violence in New Orleans. My heart really does go out to all the victims of gang and gun violence in New Orleans. It's absolutely a tragedy. And I have a lot of close friends. I have one comes to mind immediately who lost a very close family member. It was like a genuine tragedy, an innocent bystander who got shot. Huge tragedy. And so this person is supercharged to bring about gun reform. And I tried to tell them that, we're just moving into a new world where people can 3D print guns at home. So it's not enough to have gun reform where you change who can buy them at the stores or whatever. We just need a completely new paradigm about how we think about that kind of problem. And really, just to wrap up that idea in a nice little bow, it comes down to personal responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, and you're not going to be able to prevent people from creating weapons with 3D printers in their houses because it's going to get continuously cheaper and higher fidelity and easier. So we need to switch it around to come from a place of responsibility, and that's a much more challenging problem to solve, right? Because it's easier to regulate something, it's easier to punish somebody, it's much harder to convince somebody to be responsible for their actions, but that's the only option we have, right? So anyway, let me get back on track. I have been a huge advocate of 3D printing for a while. As I said, it's absolutely transformative from the entire spectrum of molecular nanofacturing to creating entirely new cities on Mars and everything in between. And so in 2016, I was building 3D printers. If anybody here is watching this is familiar with the Prusa 3D printer, there's a really, really great 3D printer called Prusa. It's named after a guy named Joseph Prusa. And in my opinion, it's probably the best sub $1,000 open source desktop 3D printer on the market today. I'm sure there are a lot of competitors, but it's pretty darn good. For $1,000, like, this thing is amazing. And so I had built 3 of them, just bought them and built them because I just thought they were so cool. And every time I built one, the wait list was like 8 or 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 15 weeks. And so I knew that all of the hardware, all of the software, everything was open source. And so I started thinking, I bet I could just clone everything and throw my brand on it, and then I could have a 3D printer and I could potentially absorb some of that market. Now, that was a bit of a naive idea. Anybody who's ever done anything in hardware knows the cliche is that hardware is hard. But I did make a lot of progress, and I learned a ton. I think in the end I built a dozen, maybe 15 of these printers, just prototyping them out by myself with one of my real good friends. And so the final sort of prototype was that I had a 3D printer which was connected to the Internet of Things over MQTT. That's the IoT protocol, which is like a publish and subscribe protocol. It's made for low power, low bandwidth, low memory devices, the Internet of Things, right? And then also some Web 2 technology, just HTTP stack, the typical thing, HTTP request, returning JSON. And then also some Web 3 tech to sort of glue it all together, right? So I was able to ultimately have a very crude prototype where I could use an Ethereum smart contract to kick off a 3D print by checking a blockchain and making MQTT calls. And at the time, so a little bit backstory on this. You may have seen in my previous video that I got into Bitcoin in 2011 or so. I got my first coins in 2011. So I've been like brainstorming on these same ideas for many years. So around the time of the Ethereum yellow paper, let's say 2015, I had this idea for developer SDKs and cloud services for Bitcoin. right? So, or even then, I knew, well, if you're a developer, you've got to have a best-in-class suite of APIs and tooling, and then you need cloud services, right? That's just the way this plays out. And so I tried to do this even in 2015, but again, it was just too early. I wasn't yet mature enough as an engineer, and it didn't work out. But as I started to build this sort of connection of Web 3 and Web 2 and MQTT, the IoT, and this 3D printer, I started to realize, wow, truffle. Now, truffle is amazing. It was the first time I had seen a blockchain SDK that was that good. And I'm a big believer that the right set of tools can allow you to operate at 10x or 100x more than what you would right now, right? So it's like if you got to get to a million, if you got to count one by one, it's going to take a long time. If you can do multiplication, that's much quicker. If you can do exponential, it's even much quicker. So depending on your abstraction level, depending on your tool set, you can accomplish things so much better. And another really great lesson is if you choose the right tool set, it'll do much of your work for you. There's more libraries, there's more communities, there's more Stack Overflow posts, there's more email lists, there's more meetups, there's more conferences, there's more businesses, there's more third-party services, there's more cloud services, there's more integration with major players, there's more opportunity, and there's more synergy if you choose the right tool set. If you choose the wrong tool set, you're doing all of that work yourself, right? So truffle, my big takeaway was really that I kind of got blown away by truffle. Okay, so that's in, let's say, 2017. Well, in August of 2017, of course, is when the Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash fork happened. And so at the time, I had some BTC on a Trezor hardware wallet. Ding. And if I remember correctly, 3 days after the fork, maybe a week, after the fork, Trezor actually enabled people to split their coins and get access to their BCH on their Trezor. And so I did that the very first day. I was like, what's this Bitcoin Cash thing all about? And so now I'm an engineer. I'm not part of the religion. I'm not part of the cult. I don't care about the hype. What I care about is the technology. I do care about branding and I do care about buzz, but those things are really meaningless if you do not have a solid foundation of engineering. One of the great lessons I've learned from Silicon Valley is that if you can marry together a really solid foundation of engineering with a genuine innovation and then get a crazy buzz around it and incentivize everybody in your team in the proper way, you can change the world in a radical way and make a crazy fortune. That's the secret sauce right there, right? Bedrock of engineering and innovation in tech, properly incentivizing your team, and then building a genuine buzz, and boom. And so so in that context of me really just caring about the engineering, not even caring about the tribe, not even caring about the branding, anything, I tried out Bitcoin Cash and I immediately was like, oh, okay, I get it. This is the Bitcoin that I always knew and loved. This is the fast, inexpensive, borderless Bitcoin, the send any amount of money to anywhere, to anybody, anywhere with no middleman Bitcoin. The one that I loved back in 2011, the peer-to-peer electronic cash. I got it immediately. And so I started thinking like, there's an opportunity here to create developer tooling for Bitcoin Cash. And in the beginning, Bitcoin Cash had an insane network effect. It's been several years now, and the network effect is way dampened down. I mean, it's like 5% of what it was once, if even. But at the time, if you can go back to the original Bitcoin Cash fork, Bitcoin Cash had some serious juice, and anybody who was there in the beginning knows that it was a serious competitor, at least for a brief window of time. Okay, so I started thinking like, hey, what if I were to create something like Truffle for Bitcoin Cash? That could be a huge play. So as I mentioned in my previous video, I was at Trulia in 2012 for the IPO, initial public offering. We raised, I think, 102 million on the New York Stock Exchange. And then later, Trulia was acquired by Zillow for $2.5 billion. And the founder of Trulia, whose name is Pete Flint, went on to become a VC, venture capitalist, here in San Francisco at a place called the NFX Guild. So I want to take a second to just shout out to Pete. He is really like an quadruple plus player. I think he's probably one of the great engineers great entrepreneurs of our generation. He's still a young man. I suspect he's maybe 40. I'm not even sure. Maybe early 40s, late 30s, but still a young man, especially in the context of life extension and what's ahead of us. And he's obviously incredibly successful, but more importantly, man, this guy gets it in a deep way. And so his new VC firm is called NFX Guild, Network Effects Guild. And their whole trip, the whole thing they just super deep dive on and obsess on is network effects. Pete is really one of the first people who helped me understand the true power of network effects. And if you go check out NFX Guild on Google it. They have James Courier as one of his partners, and there's several other really great people there. They release really, really in-depth writings on the power of network effects, and they show different examples throughout the world and different examples throughout Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley history, I should say. It's really good. Go check them out, NFX Guild. So around December of 2017, I was just in like a really high place in my life. I was just incredibly personally successful, and I was working on my own thing, and I was just accomplishing so much. And so I hit Pete up one day, and I was like, hey man, I really feel like I'm experiencing an inflection point in my life. Like, this is a special moment, and I'm aware of it. I need somebody to brainstorm with. And he was like, sweet, come by the office. So I went down to the office in San Francisco, and we had a little coffee and chill session, and we started spitballing ideas. And he's like, well, what are you working on? And so my first thing was clone. I'm building a 3D printer. 3D printing is going to be transformative, et cetera, et cetera. So we started, pulling at the threads, going down the rabbit hole. And I remember he said something like, I'm just going to be straight with you here. We've talked to like 10 different 3D printing companies, and there's only 2 that we're even considering talking to again. And the examples I used earlier, one of them 3D prints organs, the other one 3D prints buildings. So if you are doing just desktop 3D printing and it's just an open source clone of an existing relatively successful 3D printer company, it's going to be an extremely hard deal to break into, because think about how much money you're putting into each machine, right? You're not buying this stuff in bulk from China. You don't have any edge. You're paying Alibaba prices or whatever, Amazon prices. You're not yet at scale. So the machines themselves are individually expensive to build. How much are you making in profit off of one? Right, not a lot. So potentially not the best startup idea if you're trying to go really big, really fast. So what else you got going on? I was like, okay. So I started telling him about BITBOX and my idea for this developer tooling ecosystem for Bitcoin Cash, and he was super receptive to that. And I remember him saying, like, as VCs, like the biggest and the fastest money plays we've ever seen are all on the blockchain. So if you have an edge there, that's where I would focus. Those were like some of the best words I've ever heard in my life, man. Talk about good advice. That very night when I went home, I sunset cloned completely, and I pivoted that night into working on BitBox. And so I just started pouring myself into this vision of building developer tooling for the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem. And I did it all. I built it by myself in my bedroom here in Silicon Valley, kind of like classic cliche. And it absolutely exploded. I remember very clearly after about 8 weeks, it had been downloaded in 110 different countries, right? So all over the world. And I was just getting so much positive feedback, and I was connecting with all these people online. And then one night, I'm sitting in my room late at night. It's like 10 or 11. I just got off work. I just shut down working on BitBox. And all of a sudden, I get I think it was a Twitter DM. I'm pretty sure that he hit me up on Twitter. And it was Corbin. If anybody knows Corbin from Bitcoin.com, Corbin is an absolute block star. Like, there are some people that I really do believe are true to the game, true to the cause. Corbin is one of those guys. He really is like an A player in my book. Corbin, you're a champion. So he hit me up on Twitter. I didn't know who he was, right? So he hits me up on Twitter, and he's like, hey, are you the guy behind BitBox? And I'm like, I am. And he's like, yeah, man, Roger really wants to talk to you. Do you have a moment? And of course, I immediately knew who Roger was by first name, right? Roger Ver. He didn't even need to say Roger Ver. He just said, hey, man, Roger wants to talk to you. Do you have a second? And I was like, yeah, I do, of course. And so immediately, boom, I'm talking to Roger, and Roger's in Tokyo. And he's at the Bitcoin.com office, and he's sitting in front of that black screen that is behind, we used to sit in front of when we did the Friday update, right? It says Bitcoin.com all over it. And I'm like, nice. You got to remember, I've been into Bitcoin since 2011, and the 2 people who had a huge impact on me in the beginning were definitely Roger Ver and Andreas Antonopoulos. Those 2 guys, simply based upon their initial impact on my life by helping me mentally on-ramp into the Bitcoin game, are just champions in my book, right? Those guys really, really got it early on, and they on-ramped the entire world, man. And so, I see Roger, I'm like, hey, man, what's up? and he cuts right to the business. I got to give the dude mad respect for just going straight for the kill. And his immediate first words were, "Hey man, we really love your work. We'd love to bring it under our brand. Do you want to move to Tokyo?" And so, of course, I'm like, yes, I do want to move to Tokyo. I have a son in San Francisco, so I can't be there full time, but yeah, I'll move to Tokyo part time. And he's like, all right, let's book the tickets. And so, just a very short amount of time, I don't remember exactly, but it was on the matter of weeks. I was in Tokyo with an apartment working at the Bitcoin.com office. And so, that was absolutely amazing. And I have like that particular on ramping journey, just how fast it worked. I had the intuition for Bitcoin or for BitBox. I talked to Pete. He said I would do that if I were you. I started working on it. 2 months later, it absolutely exploded. 2 months or less later than that, I was literally in Tokyo working at Bitcoin.com. And so, just some thoughts on Tokyo. Tokyo is probably my favorite city in the world. I have a lot of affection for San Francisco. My son is here. My roots are here. I have a lot of affection for New Orleans as well. New Orleans is a really magical place. I have a lot of affection for Hong Kong, and I have a lot of affection for Tokyo. Currently, my intention is when my son graduates high school, he's 12 today, so a handful more of years. My intention is to split my time between Tokyo and Hong Kong. Both places are absolutely outrageous. If you have never been, you really, really, really need to put it at the top of your list. Tokyo is amazing. Just the people there are just so beautiful and so cordial and so polite. The spirit is just so great. The city is amazing, incredibly hyper modern, hyper clean and safe. You can be walking home at 3:30, 4 a.m. in Tokyo, and you're going to be totally confident that you're safe. It's just an absolutely outrageously amazing city. I've always wondered if there were some like hidden, like what was the symbolism of Satoshi saying that he was from Japan? I don't remember if he said he was from Tokyo, but I'm not entirely confident that Satoshi was, one person. I'm not confident that Satoshi was a man, a woman. I don't know what Satoshi was because Satoshi was pseudonymous. So simply because Satoshi says he was a young man from Japan, I only take that with a grain of salt. I don't know that to be true, but I always wonder, is there some symbolism of why they chose Japan? Japan is just such an amazing city, and I have so much love for it. I had an apartment in Roppongi. Roppongi is just this super posh area, and it was right near the Bitcoin.com office. I spent a lot of time in Shibuya. I have some really, really close and intimate friends there. A lot of love for Tokyo. I'll be there hopefully this fall. So now, sort of about my Bitcoin.com journey. So Bitcoin.com is a special place, and I think it's a special place because it sort of is built around Roger, and Roger is a very unique and special person. Like, he is very polarizing, and whether you love Roger or hate Roger, you have to appreciate that he has stepped into the books of history. Like, for better or worse, depending on how you feel about Roger, he is definitely the kind of character who's going down in history. People are going to know about Roger in the future, for sure. And so my personal experience with Roger, so I'm the kind of person that I'm, by default, I'm just a loyal person. I have a lot of gratitude. If you have made a big impact on my life, I'm usually loyal to the end. I'm on your team, man. You can count on me. If our paths take us different places, if our paths cross, if our paths are parallel, if you've had a really big impact on my life, man, I'm on your team. I got love forever. You can break that, right? Anything's possible, but it would take a lot. I understand that people go through ups and downs of their lives, and if I've seen something really good out of a person at some point, I'm willing to bear with them if they're going through the troughs and the crests of their life. So that just being said, I'm a very loyal person, and if somebody has had a big impact on me, I'm usually pretty loyal to them. So my personal opinion of Roger is actually quite high, and I know, again, I know he's incredibly polarizing, but from my perspective, Bitcoin.com acquired my startup, right? That's like every startup founder's dream. There's many different sort of dreams that every startup founder has, but nearly everyone has the dream of getting their startup acquired, right? I mean, that's just like one of those things you check off your box as an entrepreneur. Roger helped me accomplish that. Now, granted, it was my idea, my hard work, my dream, my vision, my execution. That's what helped me accomplish it. But Roger brought it across the finish line by acquiring BitBox. And BitBox became the heart of the developer.bitcoin.com platform. And it still even lives on today in fullstack.cash by the amazing Chris Troutner. That, of course, being one of the amazing powers of open source software is that it can, survive for indefinitely. Um, so, I like Roger a lot. We used to go out and have taco rice for lunch, like on the regular in Tokyo. We went out anytime somebody, like one of his players from around the world, would come into the city. We would all go out and have dinner. Mike Novogratz came one night. We all went out. We rented this. So if you've seen on Netflix, there's this show called Jiro Dreams of Sushi, I think is what it's called, something like that. And it's about this old school like Don sushi chef in Tokyo. Where they take that stuff seriously. Like this guy is the real deal. His apprentice. I'm not even kidding. The guy worked under the Jiro guy. I want to say 40 years, but let's say 20 years because 40 is a long time. This guy was an apprentice of Jiro Dreams of Sushi, right? This guy was his apprentice for like 20, 40 years and finally got the nod from Jiro, like, all right, dude, you're good enough. Go do your thing. And he went and created this just ridiculously posh sushi joint in Tokyo. And we rented the whole place out. It was like Mike Novogratz and his family, myself, Roger, Sean, the head of mining. And it was just this incredibly cool evening, right, where the women were all in full kimono. It was incredibly, incredibly formal Japanese sushi place at this absolutely ridiculous joint with Roger and Mike Novogratz. It was truly like an amazing night, right? Again, I respect Roger a lot. I even think of Roger as a friend, but I'm not naive enough to believe that he reciprocates that. I have no idea how he feels about me, but like if Roger needs something from me, he can reach out to me, and if I can do it, I will absolutely do what I can to help Roger. I have a lot of respect for him. Now that's all the positive. What are some negatives? Well, I think it was probably an absolutely huge mistake to do the Mt. Gox video. That is a historically poor choice. I think when you see him, he looks like he's like in a hostage situation and he's reading a note. He's incredibly tense. He's like sweaty. You got the 5 o'clock stubble. It's not a good look at all. And that singular video will forever be used as an attack point against him. And Roger's really good with social media and he understands how this stuff works. And he has a video on the Bitcoin.com YouTube channel where he addresses it directly. So, I'm not even judging the merits of it. I'll let Roger do that himself. He has a great video. But I'll just say in hindsight, that one probably didn't play out that great. I don't know what was on the line, what convinced him to do that video, but that ended up being a very, very bad look. And despite all the amazing work he did for Bitcoin, people will forever use that Mt. Gox video to attack him and to discredit him as new people on-ramp into the ecosystem. So I'm quite sure, because many of them have sent me messages, that there are tons of people who hate Roger for no other reason than that video. They weren't around at the time. They don't know anything about the history of anything. But they hate him for that very reason, that somebody showed them that video on r/Bitcoin and said, this guy is, you should hate him. So I don't know how he feels about it. I've never asked him about it personally, but to me that was not a good look and probably wasn't the best decision ever. The other thing I'll say is that I think like not everybody at Bitcoin.com falls into this category. There are some amazing people there. Corbin comes to mind, Emil comes to mind, Stefan Rust comes to mind, Makoto comes to mind, Akane and Joro come to mind. I know not all of them are still with Bitcoin.com currently, but I think that because Roger is such a, he's like a celebrity basically, he's a genuine block star, that he is surrounded by yes men and women. And I don't know if that's intentional or not. I don't think it is because I'm not a yes man and I was in his inner circle and I always spoke my mind, right? I never held back. I said exactly what I thought. I get paid to have an informed decision. So if you ask me what my opinion is, I'm going to give it to you. You may not like it, but don't ask me if you don't want to know the truth. And so I always gave Roger my opinion, and I did not perceive him as wanting to stuff his surroundings with yes men, but I think it's just a natural byproduct of being a charismatic, wealthy, young, successful person. I think it's easy for people to fall under your spell and to just agree to whatever you're saying. And so one thing I do think is that Roger so identifies with being Bitcoin Jesus that he is not able to really appreciate the Web3 innovations and all the stuff that are happening. And the reason I say that is because when I was at Bitcoin.com, it felt to me like we really, really were trying to shoehorn everything that's happening in the DeFi revolution into Bitcoin Cash, right? So we wanted to have smart contracts. We really wanted to have tokens. We really wanted to have privacy. We really wanted to have all of these different things. But the tech stack just does not support it, right? The tokens aren't miner validated. The scripting language isn't Turing complete. The privacy is just coin shuffling. It's not zero knowledge proofs. There's a lot of reasons. It has zero conf. It doesn't have, Avalanche's immutable and irreversible finality after 1 second, right? You have to wait 10 minutes for one block. You have to wait 1 hour to be sure your thing's not to get reorged. Bitcoin Cash is a sub. It's a SHA-256 chain, and it's competing against Bitcoin, which has all that mining power. There's many different reasons why I don't think that the Bitcoin Cash stack is ultimately the superior tech stack, but it was hard to sort of argue that point at Bitcoin.com because Bitcoin.com was so hyper Bitcoin centric. So if I could end this section, it would just be some tips and some thoughts for Bitcoin.com. So if I were running Bitcoin.com, what I would do is I would totally just sunset the entire, Bitcoin Cash's Bitcoin thing. I would just completely sunset that. I would take some egg on the face. I would even go out and say, we tried that, we thought that, we're moving on, we've matured, we've changed our vision. Now what we want to do is we just want to embrace the blockchain technology for the radical new innovative technology it is. And in the same way that we really appreciated Bitcoin when it first came out, and the same way we really appreciated Bitcoin for the genuine technological innovation it is, we also appreciate Ethereum. We also appreciate Avalanche. We also appreciate all of these different decentralized blockchain technologies that are bringing this financial freedom all around the world. So that's what I would do if I was running Bitcoin.com. I would just sunset the entire Bitcoin Cash obsession, and I would on-ramp into a crypto obsession, because the greatest asset that Bitcoin.com has is their domain. And that's not a hugely great asset, let's be honest here. I don't even buy .com domains. To me, .com domains are passe. I buy .space, .earth, .cash. There's so many new top-level domains. But I am 10 steps ahead of, mom and pop with regards to how I lean into this tech. And I do appreciate that as the entire world on-ramps into cryptocurrency, there's a ton of people who are simply just going to go to their browser and type in Bitcoin.com, because that's just the way they kind of think that the internet and the computer works. And so the Bitcoin.com domain name is still outrageously powerful and successful, but I just think they're betting on the wrong horse. I'm sorry, it's just the way I see it. Bitcoin Cash is not the winner. And so I would sunset it. I would adopt like a crypto-centric thing. I would be blockchain agnostic. I would leverage the fact that we are Bitcoin.com to on-ramp people into the many different flavors of crypto. And ultimately, if that failed, I would just sell the domain. It's worth so much that I'm quite sure, if nothing else, you could cash it out. That's my advice for Bitcoin.com. So, what were some highs and what were some lows? Well, I think the biggest high of Bitcoin.com was that I traveled all around the world. I went to Tokyo 6 times, I believe. I went to Hong Kong 5 times. I was at Jeju Island, so I went to Seoul, South Korea. If anybody knows what Jeju Island is, it's a little tiny island off the south coast of Korea. I used to live on Kauai, Hawaii. That's where I met my son's mother. And Jeju Island felt to me like the Kauai of Korea. It was super cool. I would love to go back there. I hope to go back there. I went to Beijing. So I went to the Bitmain headquarters and met the Wormhole team. That was a really, really cool experience. So, Wormhole is basically a fork of the Mastercoin or protocol that used to, or the Omni. I'm sorry, it's a fork of Omni that used to be live on BTC. Maybe it is still live on BTC. I don't know, but it's like. There were 2 big token protocols that were sort of emerging in Bitcoin Cash. There were actually a bunch of them at one time, but the network effect drained, and unfortunately, most of those projects just died off. But there was SLP tokens, which was like a colored coin type thing where you just color satoshis and it creates like a DAG, and then there was what was called Wormhole, and Wormhole was an account-based system. It still just used like the op return to write 220 bytes of data to the chain, and it would do asset issuance and management, burning and sending and minting tokens type thing. But I was confident that one of those was going to absolutely pop. And so I created Wormhole SDK and SLP SDK during my time at Bitcoin.com because I was so positive that one of them would win. So I bet on them both. And sure enough, SLP won. Wormhole ended up getting sunset by Bitmain, but right before it got sunset, there's a funny story. So Bitcoin.com for a while had a head of marketing whose name was Gavriel with a V. And him and Roger and he were in the country of Georgia at like a big Bitcoin mining conference or something. And they saw Jihan Wu, the creator of Bitmain, in the green room. And Roger was like, "Hey, this is Gavriel." And Jihan was like, "Oh my God, I love your work, man. I love BitBox." And he was talking about Gabriel, not Gavriel. And Roger was like, "No, no, 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 man. That's Gabriel. This is Gavriel, our marketing guy." And Jihan was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." So later, Roger told me that story in Tokyo, and he was like, "This week I'm giving a talk at the Future of Money conference here in Tokyo, and Jihan's supposed to be there. Why don't you go? And if I can connect with him in the green room, I'll see if I can get you guys to connect." And so, sure enough, we went. Roger gave a presentation, and at the very end, like right before we were ready to leave, well, I was out in the lobby. I didn't know. I hadn't seen Roger in a bit, and out of nowhere, he comes like rushing across the floor, and he's like, "Gabriel, Gabriel, right now, Jihan's in the back. Let's go." And I'm like, "Nice." And so we go back to the green room, and I get like 5 minutes with Jihan. It's very cordial. Um, and he's like, I would love it if you could come to Beijing and meet the Wormhole team. And right then, Roger was like, "Hey, man, do you have your passport on you?" And I'm like, "I do." And he's like, "Give it to my assistant real quick." So I give it to Roger's assistant, Mickey, who's awesome, Mickey, if you see this. And Mickey, I think 72 hours later, I was in Beijing. Roger got me, Bitcoin.com got me, paid for me to get a 10-year visa where I can spend 6 or 8 weeks a year in China for the next, probably now 7 years or so. And so that was pretty sweet. 72 hours later, I was in Beijing. I got to go to Tiananmen Square. I got to go to old Beijing. Beijing is amazing. China is absolutely amazing. I got to go to Bitmain and meet up with the entire Wormhole team. There was like 30 or 35 people in this one room working on this. It was a really cool experience. As a side note, so what do I think about Jihan? I think Jihan is a wizard of the highest order. I think his work is ultimately going to have an impact on billions and billions and billions of people. He's a young man. He's in his mid-30s at the most. He's one of the most successful entrepreneurs in all of China. And China is a serious player, especially in the future. And if you've ever been to China, you know what it's like with the Great Firewall. And it's a different world. If you're from the US and you've never been to China, then you don't totally understand, because when you land in China, there's an entirely different connect to the Wi-Fi, you can't hit a single site that you're used to. They've got their own infrastructure behind the Great Firewall. And so crypto has the potential to be even more so impactful in China than in the United States, potentially. And, Jihan is like a handful of people who's going to have a radical impact across China. So in the small chance you see this, Jihan, man, I'm absolutely a huge fan of your work. Thank you. So I also went to Amsterdam. I went to Milan. We had a Bitcoin Cash technical plenary meeting there. I think it was called Lago de Garda or something like that. Sorry if I butchered that. It was absolutely beautiful. That's where I found out about Avalanche. So at the time, Amare Sachet, one of the co-creators of Bitcoin Cash, gave a talk called Embrace the DAG. And then later, actually, Gun and Kevin, the two co-founders of Avalanche, or Ava Labs, actually woke up at something like 4 a.m. their time in Ithaca, New York, and gave us a presentation on Avalanche. So this is when I very first found out about Avalanche, was back in Milan. I also went to Australia and gave a presentation in Australia. I took my mother and my son down there. That was pretty epic. I went to Las Vegas, so I traveled all around the U.S. The most exotic place I went was Moscow. And I mean exotic in the sense that I grew up in the United States. I literally don't know a single other person in my entire life who ever went to Moscow. I had to get a special kind of visa to go there. It was crazy. The most surreal thing I have ever done was I went to Lenin's tomb. So, I've done everything, man. I've pierced the veil multiple times. Like, I've been there and back a few different times. But I've never done anything like going to Lenin's tomb. So if you go picture Red Square, everybody's seen Red Square. You can picture, Stalin giving a talk in black and white with a bunch of tanks cruising in front of him. That's Red Square. At one end is St. Basil's Cathedral, which is like the famous, multicolored tops, absolutely beautiful cathedral. On the other side is the Kremlin, right, which is like the seat of power for the Russian government. And then on the other side is like this super posh, like French Quarter style shopping district with Starbucks and McDonald's. It's just a very, very surreal kind of place. And then right at the front of the Kremlin, they have like this mausoleum wall that has all of these plaques and, statues and all kinds of stuff to all of the great Soviet leaders, who've come and gone. And then they had this huge mausoleum, and you stand in line and you wait maybe like 5 minutes. It's not like there's tons of people there. I can't imagine, the amount of money they must invest in this infrastructure, because there's like people everywhere and guards, and but there's nobody there. And presumably on holidays and stuff, there were people there. But when I was there was maybe like 3 families in front of me. And so you stand in line for 5 minutes, you get to the front. Maybe I went through a lightweight metal detector. I don't even remember. It was nothing super intense. And security was very, very lax. Although there are soldiers there, and I'm quite sure they'll get down if they need to, but it wasn't super, super intense. And then you walk past this big, long mausoleum wall with all the faces and all the plaques and roses, and it's very solemn. It's actually a really powerful spot. And then you go down into Lenin's tomb, and it's literally Vladimir Lenin laying there. Like the actual dude is just laying there, and you can walk right up to him, probably 3 feet away. And it's this trippy, like pink light. Just the mood of the place is like, where did I just step into? And then in each corner, there's these big dudes, like big, big, big old Russian soldier boys, just in every corner. And they got their eye on you, boy, as you walk around, and like no nonsense in the linen room. And it's incredibly somber, incredibly surreal. It's really the most surreal experience I've ever had in my life. And I'm telling you, man, I've been there and back. And so that was absolutely amazing. And so, yeah, I think just to sum it up, the super highs of working at Bitcoin.com were traveling all around the world and getting a sense of how crypto is impacting everybody, right? So like I mentioned, I went to Russia. I would have not anticipated crypto having the impact that it did in Russia and China from the way I perceive it having grown up in America, right? I perceive America as being capitalist and other places around the world not being so much. But it really just gives you a sense of how crypto scratches that itch for everybody in the world. Because really everybody in the world benefits from the free market solving their problems, and everybody benefits from being able to invest their own time and energy and reap back reward for it. Basically, the basic principles of capitalism that haven't been bastardized. You know what I'm saying? So the highs of Bitcoin.com were traveling around the world and seeing how crypto was just impacting people everywhere. Everywhere I went, crypto is making a huge impact. Crypto is worldwide. Send any amount of money to anybody, anywhere, nearly instantly and nearly for free with no middleman. It's an absolutely profound idea, and it still turns me on as much as it did from the time I read the white paper in 2011. And then the other super high of Bitcoin.com was the team. So I said some negative things about the team, people surrounding Roger, but there's also some of the best engineers and most blockchain centric and minded, understanding the full implications of the blockchain people I've ever met. And they deserve a shout out again. Emil, the CTO of Bitcoin.com, maybe he's been outclassed at Avalanche because, my God, there's some outrageous engineers at Ava Labs. Steven, I'm looking at you, homie. But Emil, when I was at Bitcoin.com, he for sure was the most knowledgeable person about Bitcoin and blockchain technology that I had ever met. He is like an encyclopedic memory. He can recall everything. He knows every detail. He knows every BIP, every different format of transaction, everything, man. Like, this dude is a huge wealth of knowledge, and he's the CTO. Corbin, of course, I mentioned, he's the dude who reached out for me to me to first contact and have a conversation with Roger. Corbin is amazing. I still am in regular communication with him. Stefan, also an amazing individual I met. He's based out of Hong Kong. Truly a wizard, Stefan Rust. Makoto, which is one of Roger's assistants, a Japanese gentleman who is absolutely awesome. Akane and Joro and their little Alice. Congrats, y'all. Joro, you man, you. My dude. Lots of amazing people in Tokyo. Bitcoin.com is amazing. I have a lot of love and respect for them. The highs, outweigh the lows. There were some lows. What were some lows? I think the biggest lows were the BCH and the BSV fork. That was really just a bad time all around. I saw so many people that I just really, really respected. Just the very worst came out in them, and I'm unable to forget that. Right? So it's like, the fork just genuinely brought out the very worst in people, and I didn't like that at all. I didn't like the entire BSV thing. Like, what are my thoughts on Craig Wright? I don't believe Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto. And the reason I say that is because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? It's just that simple. You can't even say it any more simple than that, man. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And if you're unwilling to meet with the evidence, then I'm unwilling to believe the claim. It's just that simple. And so I do not believe that I have seen anything to convince myself that Craig Wright is Satoshi Nakamoto. I'm humble enough to admit that he might be. Like, it's very possible that he is. I happen to not believe it simply because I have not seen the proof. right? I need to see the proof. I will say that, again, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the people who go around saying with 100% certainty that he is Satoshi Nakamoto fall into one of three camps, in my opinion. Number one, it's possible he is Satoshi and that he proved it to them in some way. Totally possible. So it's entirely possible when people say, I'm positive that Craig Wright is Satoshi, that he proved it to him, and maybe he is. I'm humble enough to admit it. The second group is they're just being dishonest, right? It's possible that people realize that he's not, and they're still saying it, and they're just being dishonest. And then I think the third group is just marks, right? It's people who just sort of got sold a story and wanted to believe it and believed it without evidence. And I will say, if you cannot tell who the mark is you, right? So something to think about. I had two other low points with my time at Bitcoin.com and with Bitcoin Cash. Number one is I started to have a serious crisis of confidence around the technology. Avalanche was a big part of it. When I saw Gun and Kevin give that presentation on Avalanche, but that wasn't the only one. See, I'm a developer evangelist. I travel all around the world on-ramping teams and businesses into Bitcoin Cash or into crypto. At the time, it was Bitcoin Cash. And so, I was going everywhere, man. I was putting my face on this brand everywhere, all over the world. I was standing on stage and being like, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Cash. But then back in the green room, I would be talking to all the other engineers. And I just started to have a crisis of confidence in the technology because I realized there was just superior stuff out there. And so that was the second one, is that I just found it a little bit harder each time I got on stage to really evangelize Bitcoin Cash, because I just realized, there's better stuff out there. And I am on the eternal quest for the higher level abstraction, right? Like, I'm not obsessed with the brand. I'm not obsessed with the tech stack. The tech stack is a means to the end, and the end is that I want to uplift the human condition in my lifetime. So I'm always looking for that higher level abstraction. The history of computer science and the history of programming languages have shown us that, code bases go from programming in the small to programming in the large, and languages go from low level to high level. Rinse, wash, repeat. And so whatever today that we think is huge and super high level, our grandkids are going to think that's very low level and very small, right? There will always be higher level abstractions. It's just the way that humans work. We stand upon the shoulders of the previous giants and we build new things. We're always adding layers to the layer cake chart. It's just the way we work. And so I had a crisis of confidence in the technology. And then lastly, I was just going through a lot of personal stuff. So over the course of about 6 months, I lost, a few people in my life. I lost a really close friend. I lost my father. I lost 3 of my 4 grandparents. And, I turned 40 this year. So it's kind of like I'm in that stage in my life. So, it's not unexpected, but it's a lot. And if anybody who's ever gone through that, it can really throw you for a trip. I started going down the rabbit hole of, what is this all about? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do we get older? Why do we die? I really had the whole crisis, the human condition thing hit me hard. And so despite the fact that I was traveling all over the world, despite the fact that I was very successful, despite the fact that I was making good money, I was just going through a lot of personal stuff. And so really sort of at the end of 2018, I kind of hit the beginning of 2019, really, I kind of just hit a wall, and I decided to step away from Bitcoin Cash and from Bitcoin.com. And so I wanted to kind of wrap up here with my thoughts on Bitcoin Cash. So my thoughts on Bitcoin Cash overall are not entirely positive, but I do want to say, this is not an attack on Bitcoin Cash. I wouldn't have even given this presentation right now if I didn't care, right? It's like one of those things where, to me, Bitcoin Cash feels very much like an ex-partner, like an ex-girlfriend. That's emotionally where I'm at with it, right? Like, if you've ever run into a previous partner, a previous lover somewhere, it's bittersweet. Not always, right? Sometimes you're not into it, but sometimes you see somebody and you're like, man, I don't want to be with that person anymore, but man, I still have a lot of affection in my heart for them, and I really thought that, it could have been something more than it was, and it didn't end up being what I thought it was, but man, that one chapter in time was really special, man. Like, we'll always have Tokyo, you know what I'm saying? And that's how I feel about Bitcoin Cash. I have so much love. I still have so many friends in that ecosystem. I myself invested a literal fortune, like an actual fortune of money and time and social equity, which is worth way more than money. My time is worth something. My social equity is worth something. Money is, money. But I invested a literal fortune in all three in Bitcoin Cash. And so if it seems like I'm attacking Bitcoin Cash, it's not that way at all. It's that I had a ton of love for it. I invested a ton of my personal equity and time into it. And so I've taken these lessons out of it. And so now I feel like I'm at a place in my life where I can share them when I didn't think I probably was before. So I think the biggest problem, Bitcoin Cash has several problems. I think the big one is that it has a very, very splintered network effect. So, Bitcoin forked into BTC and BCH, and BCH forked into BCH and BSV. And then recently BCH forked again into eCash and BCH. And like, it's all about the network effect, dude. The network effect is what we're trying to get here, right? The network effect is where the value of the network grows for every additional person that uses it. So every time you fork your network effect, it's not every time you fork your community and your tribe, it's not like you're getting 50-50 on the network effect scale, right? The winner is probably going to get the vast majority of the network effect, and the loser is going to get a small slice of it. And so I remember what it was like when BTC and BCH forked. Bitcoin Cash was a serious player. I remember going to when Bitmain introduced Wormhole in Hong Kong. That was a huge conference. I live in Silicon Valley, man. I've been to Moscone Center. I've been to big tech conferences here, and it was equivalent to that in Hong Kong. I mean, I'm talking 1,000 people or more in that room. Electric. They're announcing like the next huge token platform. People were going crazy. That network effect is not here now, man. It's just not. Bitcoin Cash's network effect has gone down, and it's operating in the single digits, and that's a problem for Bitcoin Cash. I think Bitcoin Cash suffers at a technical level, so it does not have miner validated tokens. I've talked about this many times, but it's a big deal, and I know firsthand because I was one of the hugest advocates of introducing tokens into the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem. And I assure you, if Bitcoin Cash's tokens were that amazing, we would see the next huge generation of DeFi apps launching on it. But I hear you saying, what about AnyHedge? What about DToken? What about Jason from BitPay, who's got a chips that's going to make better smart contracts? What about Tobias? He proved with Mitra. What about, CashScript? Yeah, man, I know. I went through the entire journey. My thought is that those things are okay, but they're not sufficient, and they're competing with Ethereum and Avalanche and this whole other generation. There's 1,000 chains. Ethereum and Avalanche aren't the only ones. And these guys all are working with Turing complete smart contracts with like crazy new decentralized consensus stuff happening and super fast throughput, fast finality, all of the bells and whistles that come with DeFi, tokenomics and prediction markets and stable coins and like it's a very, very, very tough field to compete against, and Bitcoin Cash just does not have the tools to do it. On that same tip, Turing incomplete scripting language, right? Script is absolutely a nightmare to work with. I was part of the team that helped create CashScript, so I know all about CashScript. Roscoe Callis gets the credit. I'm not trying to creep on his work, but I was there. I helped make that happen. And CashScript is not Solidity. It looks like Solidity. It spits out some stuff that looks like Solidity, but it's not Solidity. It lacks a lot, like state, for example, like recursion, for example, kind of critical, don't you think? And so even though Bitcoin Cash has bigger blocks, even though Bitcoin Cash has zero confirmation, even though Bitcoin Cash has SLP tokens, even though Bitcoin Cash has Cash Shuffle, which is like a coin shuffler for privacy, even though Bitcoin Cash has CashScript, even though it has all of these things, it's not enough. It's not enough to, even though they turned on the Satoshi opcodes, even though they have 220 bytes in the operaterm, Bitcoin Cash is competing with technology that was created in 2011 and 2012 against technology that was created in 2021. And if you know anything about the pace of change, you know the pace of change is accelerating radically, and Moore's law is about every 18 months or so. So, 10 years is like 5 turns of the screw with regards to Moore's law. There's just been so much radical innovation that I just don't think Bitcoin Cash has the technical chops to compete. And then my last one, and this is the biggest one of all. Like, the technology is important, but this one might be even bigger deal, is that Bitcoin Cash is an anti-brand. It's an also run. I understand the sentiment that Bitcoin Cash is the real Bitcoin, but unfortunately that's just not true. BTC is the real Bitcoin, and I know that is like really, really, really making some people out there salty. And again, if I can appeal to you to say that, man, I invested so much of my own personal time and money and equity into this project, like, I get the vision that Bitcoin Cash was going for, bigger blocks, right? Peer-to-peer electronic cash for the world. I get it, but that didn't make it Bitcoin. That did not make all of the brands change their ticker symbol over. That did not make, all of the hash power switch over. You can like that or you can not like that, man. I'm just simply telling you the truth. Bitcoin is one of the greatest brands in all of human history. It's got everything from the fundamentals of having two syllables to bit, binary digit, and coin, finance, all in one little package. It is beautiful. And again, you can like it or you can not like it, but Bitcoin is the Kleenex of our brand. It's the Kool-Aid of our brand. It's the Ziploc of our ecosystem, I should say. So as mom and pop on-ramp into crypto, they know Bitcoin. Sure, they may know Avalanche. Sure, they may know Ethereum. I'm not saying they don't. But the word that comes out of their mouth is Bitcoin. In the same way that people say, hand me that Ziploc or hand me that Kleenex, right? It's just this thing where a certain brand ends up encapsulating an entire product or entire ecosystem of products. And Bitcoin has that thing, for better or worse. You don't have to like it. I'm just telling you how it is. And so Bitcoin Cash will always be an also-ran brand. Bitcoin is Pepsi Cola. Bitcoin Cash is RC Cola. It's just that simple. And so those are my thoughts on Bitcoin Cash. The way I would sort of sum that up is I would say, you don't want to invest good time or good money after bad money or bad time, right? So that's what I discovered. Despite having, invested all of that time and energy and money into Bitcoin Cash, eventually I just had a crisis of confidence with the technology, and I just realized, hey man, there's something out there that will serve my personal wants and needs better. There's better technology than Bitcoin Cash that will help me accomplish what I want to accomplish. And I had to admit that maybe I was too attached to the brand, and maybe I was too attached to my role at Bitcoin.com. Maybe I was too attached to my place in the community. Maybe I was too attached to being the developer of BitBox. Maybe my ego was involved. But as I stepped back and just said, hey man, just be honest with yourself. Is this going to take you where you want to go? It's not. Okay, then you need to reevaluate the situation. And so that's what I would offer out to anybody in the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem. I would simply say that there is superior technology out there. And I would just urge you to not invest any more good time after bad time. There's better stuff out there worth checking out. Okay, so that was it. If you made it this long, you are truly a champion. So thank you so much. This is Gabriel Cardona. This has been the Subnet Podcast. In the future, Don Wonton will be a regular, I promise. I've just been working to get this equipment dialed in, and it appears that we made it an entire hour and it's still smooth, so I think we've got it dialed in. So probably tomorrow myself and the Don himself will do a chat. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. Cheers.